I'll back a little bit when I get called an honored guest. I wouldn't call honored guest. That's a tough piece. But thank you all for having me here today. I do want to spend a little bit of time, as Ms. Taylor said, we met earlier in the week to kind of talk through the agenda of the night, and I'm going to share some information about the responses that we've kind of implemented over the course since we received the letter, and kind of give an update on some status. But just to be kind of upfront about that, I didn't take the letter and have it as a check off. Like I didn't prepare what I'm talking about tonight as a check off of every single point. So I'm trying to give kind of a big picture view of it. And if I need to come back again, definitely as I work with Ms. Taylor and Coach Knight about this, we can continue the conversation, because there are a couple of other pieces that I'll get to actually at the end of what I'm going to talk about that are also pressing concerns for us. One of which is performance of our students in the first marking period. And the second is what the cohort of students looks like that requested to return to in-person learning at BCC, and how that is kind of disparate across ethnic groups and across our monitoring groups. So I am going to share my screen because there are just a few things to talk about, so bear with me for just a second while I do that. And I'm trying to see who I can see here to get a thumbs up. Dr. McGarrett, I see you on the side of my screen. Can you see my presentation? Can I get a thumbs up, Dr. McGarrett? If you, oh, I can see you also. I just want to, believe it or not, I have done a presentation before where I thought I was presenting and I was not presenting anything, and I got about 15 minutes into it before somebody said something. So I try to check that. One of the things I just, and we already talked about this, but just early in the summer, Ms. Taylor and Coach Knight sent on behalf of the Diversity Parents Council a letter that shared some concerns and some requests related to racial inequality and racist culture and attitudes among staff at BCC, and with some requests for things for us to look at and address. So we met as an administrative team. We met as an instructional leadership team, which includes all of the department chairs, several other representatives from the teaching staff and from the support services staff and other leaders in the building, and talked about how we could address some of those concerns. And several things came out of that, and I'm going to talk through a few of those kind of commitments we made over the summer, and give you a little bit of insight into what some of the things are that are going on right now. But before we do this, I know I shared a little bit of this last time with you. I just want to kind of go back to that, like BCC is changing, and this is a piece that is something that just is important to keep saying over and over. So 6 years ago, if we look at our student body and the percentage of it, percentage of students, we see some changes over the past 5 years. Some of the most marked changes actually are in those bottom two categories that are on that list. Our number of ESOL students has increased by about 50%, and our number of farm students has increased by about 45%. So those two pieces right there are part of a changing landscape at BCC. And we are definitely, our minority population is growing, and we're having to address that. And it's not something that culture of change is not an easy thing to address sometimes, but that's something, it's always important. And I keep bringing this back, and I also bring it back with the faculty, because we do have a lot of teachers who have been at BCC for a long time. We actually have a lot of teachers who graduated from BCC themselves. And just to say, like, this is a different school than it might have been even 5 or 10 years ago, as you're thinking about how you're addressing concerns. But that being said, there are some things that as you talk about how we're addressing it and what we're doing, and I speak as a representative of the school, I will talk a lot about what we're doing from an administrative point of view, but also what we're doing with staff, what we're asking students to be engaged in, and with admittedly it being really challenging to get students engaged in a lot right now. We have enough trouble getting them engaged in classes, but engaged in other activities is a challenge for us. So the first is actually a commitment that we made over the summer, and this was one of the outgrowths of our work with the instructional leadership team And that was that we would engage in professional development for staff around equity issues. And, excuse me, I'm sorry, I wolfed my dinner down right before I came up here, and now I feel like it's coming. That we would engage with staff around equity issues, and that we would work to build components, educational components, into the structure of what we're doing at BCC for students. The piece that's been the easier piece for us, honestly, has been the work with staff that we've been able to do. The work with students, again, has been a little bit more of a challenge for us, but we have some topics going forward that we're going to work with there. But some of the things that we have been able to do with that, in terms of that, and just to kind of where we are right now, is we have staff in rotational staff development modules that are related to a variety of topics: anti-bias education, restorative justice, culturally responsive instruction. Those are led by a variety of different people. Some of them actually are led by one of our student groups, Youth for Equity. Dr. McGarwa, I believe, is leading a book study. I'm looking at him. The group that I actually, the professional development that I signed up to be a part of, is article study on culturally responsive teaching techniques. But we gave teacher staff, and Dr. McGarwa, I'm going to look at you because you're a part of this. I think we gave about 6 or 7 options for staff to choose.
Yes, that's correct. There was it was about seven options, and they have a variety of meeting times. So my specific group is doing a book study, and actually the book here, the name of our book is So You Want to Talk About Race. That's the name of the book, and it's a great book, and we're dividing it up into three sections. And when we meet, we've already had our first meeting. We'll have our second meeting next Wednesday, and then we'll meet again in January. And some of the meetings take place right before our structured time on Wednesdays. Some of them take place during lunchtime, and also the other ones are after school. But it's a variety of things that people are doing: article studies, book studies, discussion groups, circles, and just talking about a variety of things in regards to equity. And so far, we've heard great things, great feedback from the staff, especially when they see some of our student groups that are leading out, as Dr. Munir mentioned, Youth for Equity being one of them, talking about the concept of race and kind of getting people out of their comfort zone. And because not everyone is at the same level of comfortability in regards to talking about race and dealing with racial issues, but we feel like when we give teachers their power of choice to choose which group they want to go to, that kind of was helping us ease a lot of them in who felt like they were, instead of being forced to go to one specific one, they actually got to choose it. So we found out that is very, very helpful from the feedback we've received so far.
Thank you, Dr. McGarwa. The other thing I want to say about those modules is those are actually for all staff members. So all of our support staff, all of our secretarial staff, everybody in the school is engaged in one of those modules, and something that they're doing. And again, with the goal that we want everybody to have some areas of growth, but we did provide some opportunities for people to self-select so that they could focus on something that if they had an interest in, that hopefully that it would have an impact for them. The second piece, which is a current state, is actually our administrative team, which is myself, the 5 assistant principals, Ms. Teicher, who's the school business administrator, and actually Ms. Black, who's the school administrative secretary, are engaged in a book study right now that is being led by the Montgomery County Public Schools Equity Initiatives Unit called Me and White Supremacy. And it's actually a small group book study. If you've never read or heard about this book, it's actually I'm going to call it a journaling book. It has short chapters of 4 to 5 pages that you read every day, and you read it over the course of 4 weeks. And it's actually it takes you through, and it gives you some questions about kind of reflection questions for each day. And a part of our study, we really are just kind of trying to engage in conversations about what impact we have in our role and what impact our beliefs have in our role at BCC as we continue to look through that. And the third piece that goes with this is we are actually, we have committed, made a 3-year commitment to the Anti-Defamation League's No Place for Hate initiative. That is a piece that we actually, next 17th is Thursday, will actually be a part of a pledge signing for that piece. So there'll be some educational components that are going on in classes on next Thursday around that. And then there are activities that will carry on throughout. Admittedly, it has taken ADL a little while to adjust to what they could do in their first year in a virtual setting, but now they are ready to roll, and we are ready since they have their stuff ready. So that's our first commitment. Our second commitment is that we have made a commitment to engage in human resources practices that promote diversity and accountability. And that is really a big thing that is important at BCC. It's something that's come up in conversations, not only in the letter that you all wrote, but in conversations that I've had with students at BCC, and has came up in March when we began our hiring season, actually. So there are a few pieces that go with that. The first is that we are really committed to matching MCPS when it comes to increasing diversity, and that we want to make sure that all of our interview teams, as they're going out and seeking staff members, are really focused on varied and diverse applicants, and that we're looking for ways to increase that diversity at BCC. We also know that we have our administration and different members of our leadership team participating in those hiring fairs that MCPS does to identify quality candidates and then to be able to hire them earlier. So just in terms of general overview of how MCPS hires, in case you don't know, BCC doesn't go out and recruit actively on our own. The Office of Human Resources and Development does the recruiting, the initial level recruiting, and the screening interviews. So about once a month, and right now it's about once a month. In the spring, it gets to be a little more frequent. They actually send out requests to schools to send administrators to their hiring fairs. So they'll gather 75 or 150 candidates who have applied to MCPS who need to be screened to just see if they meet the first level kind of qualification to be even eligible to apply for teaching jobs. And that's where we want to go. We want to be at the beginning of that. That way, when we identify a candidate in those screening interviews, we're able to say, hey, we have a math vacancy 2 months from now. I remember interviewing this person. Let's see if they're still available, see if we can go get them. And that's what we're trying to focus on. And the last thing, and this is just straight numbers. So we hired 31 new staff this year, and 14 of those new staff members were minority staff members. Again, not where we need to be, and it doesn't tip the balance heavily when we talk about 220 or so staff members at BCC, but it is a movement in the right direction there.
May I ask one question with regards to the 14 minority staff?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know the type of subjects that they're teaching, and can you break it down whether they were Black, Latino, Asian, as far as minority?
So off the top of my head, that would be really hard for me to do, and I didn't come prepared for that, and I apologize. I can provide that. So I'm trying to, and Dr. McGarrett might be able, off the top of my head, so I'm trying to think about who those new staff are. So Miss Adamson, who's one of our assistant principals, is an African-American woman. We hired an African-American male in technology, Asian female teaching science, Hispanic female teaching science, Hispanic female teaching special education. And this is just what I can remember
a math teacher, African-American male
math teacher, African-American female health teacher. I'm just trying to picture through the Rolodex in my mind. So it's spread across. Now I do want to be very fair and clear that 31 and 14 includes some different support staff members too. So that does include, we hired a new secretary in the main office this summer. We hired one new security assistant. I'm trying to remember if there's any other support staff that's on that list. That may be all that is, but that is all new staff that we hired between the end of last year that were turnover staff. So another one, just you were asking, Ms. Goldsmith, our IB MYP coordinator is an African-American male.
Art teacher as well. His wife is an art teacher,
also African-American female. So it's spread across, I guess, is where we go with that.
Okay, because this is very important that students, not only Black, Latino, and Asian students see themselves, but also white students seeing minorities in positions of authority and also in teaching capacity. So that's why I asked specifically.
I absolutely agree with you, and that is one of the things that we are looking for, and that's kind of one of the commitments that we've made in order to make sure that we increase the diversity at BCC. So the third commitment that we made, and this is a much bigger one. So, and that is really to focus on increasing those opportunities for access to honors courses, advanced placement courses, IB courses, and even some of our advanced technology classes, which would be those project lead the way classes that lead to certifications and job opportunities right out of high school graduation. And we really want to make sure we're taking a look and trying to make sure we have access to those classes for all of our students, especially our focus group students, that we're preparing those pathways. So one part of that, and is not something that's even on the list here as a current state, I forgot to add it in as I was thinking about this later, is that we actually have conversations with our feeder middle schools, because for the advanced tech completers, we actually have to have students preparing when they're in 8th grade. They have to take one of the earlier classes, Foundations of Computer Science, if they want to make it all the way through one of those pathways. So we know it's early for students when they're 13 years old to be committing to something that they want to do, but we're making sure that at both Westland and at Silver Creek, that those counseling departments and those teachers understand what they need to have students be doing when they're in 8th grade in order to make that. But for us, we actually have done an internal review of our enrollment trends in our higher level classes, and we're looking at that in terms of how we can make some movement simply internally, and what that process looks like. We have engaged in, if we talk about just the honors level classes, there were several situations where in the same classroom, we would have students who were in, I'll use English as an example. Honors English 9, there might be 20 students in a classroom, first period with the teacher taking Honors English 9. And in that same classroom, receiving the same instruction, there might be 7 students who are in on-level English 9, receiving the same instruction, same teacher, same texts, same general assignments, and the assessments were the only thing that were different. So we really looked at, we started last year actually at the end of the first semester with identifying students who were successful in that on-level. Like if you were earning an A in the on-level class, we actually reached out to about 75 parents to say, we'd like to move your child just into the honors section. We'd like to be working on getting them that honors credit. And we followed that students, and none of the 77 or so that we ended up moving had a drop in their grade, just with taking now the honors assessments. So we actually ramped that up a little bit for this year, and ended up, when we looked at that, doing away with actually on-level instruction in several classes. So right now we do not have an on-level English 9. We do not have an on-level English 11. We do not have an on-level US history, an on-level NSL government, or an on-level modern world history. Because when we looked at the data, when we looked at how students were performing, we decided that rather than have students that might be put into those courses, or even sign up for those courses because that's what they had maybe even been trained to think about themselves, that we would provide that opportunity for honors. And we haven't seen a drop-off in performance in terms of that. Now there are some other drop-offs in performance, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that we don't think would be attributable to this. So the next piece is that we actually are doing for the IB diploma program. So if you don't know, at BCC, you can choose to be either full IB diploma, which means you take the 6 courses, you complete the extended essay, you do the theory of knowledge, you do a CAS project that you go through the whole thing, you take all the assessments, you get the certain score on the whole package, and then you get that internationally recognized diploma. Or you can choose to take an individual course or several courses just based on your interest or something that you excel at. And we have worked with Miss Dean, who is our IB coordinator, excuse me, our IB diploma program coordinator, to make sure that we are providing for students and for parents information sessions to talk about what IB looks like, what it looks like if you choose to be a certificate student, which would be that student who takes 1, 2, or 3 classes, and what it looks like if you do make that commitment to being actually a diploma student, and what that looks like. And she's holding several sessions for students. Those are being advertised on our newly reinstituted morning announcements. That will, first one I think shows up tomorrow on that. But she also has sessions for parents too, because a lot of times that is a big commitment if a child is planning to be IB diploma, especially. And the first parent session I know is next Thursday evening. She'll actually be sending out information about that. But part of what we're asking Ms. Dean to do is also some targeted invitations rather than just a general announcement, to recognize, to look at students who are performing well, especially in our maths and in our sciences, and really make sure that we're asking them to come to these events. She's running, I think, 3 lunchtime sessions and a couple of after-school sessions. I don't know those dates all off the top of my head, but to make sure that we're doing some targeted invitation for that. Another piece that we've done, and this is something that we fully got out of last year, is actually the idea of course recommendations for students to access higher level classes. And we just did that as a way of making sure that students have the opportunity to do what they want to do. And that if a student feels like they want the challenge, or that they should be in an honors level class or an AP level class, that they're getting to make that choice, that it's not based on the decision of a teacher, based on whatever factors might go into that. What goes with some of those things is that we have to make sure we have some staff training. So we have been working with our staff through our staff development teacher on differentiation, which is the idea that, you know, all students might not need exactly the same thing when they're being taught in a class, and scaffolding, how we break down instructional concepts and help make sure that all students eventually get to mastery of an objective, no matter what those steps might be. So that's that piece.
Would that also be, I guess, training for the counselors? Because there was one incident that happened 2 years ago when some of the MSP students that I was mentoring, they actually were trying to get students to be able to take upper level classes. And there was a counselor that told one of the MSP students that they don't need to go into the ESOL classes because they're not going to take those types of classes anyway. And that was very disturbing. And that type of stuff needs to be obliterated, not only there, but in other places, like in other areas of the school.
So yes, it does include training for the counselors. We are, I'm going to say we're lucky this year. We actually have 3 of our 9 counselors are new to BCC this year, which is a good thing. And 2 of those 3 are actually experienced counselors who came to join us. And we have talked quite a bit with them about that. Talking specifically about ESOL, Ms. Goldsmith, we actually have been looking and working with our ESOL resource teacher to talk about opportunities we might have to get some of our ESOL students into IB classes, especially when we have students who are ESOL students who are literate in another language. That's an ideal opportunity to look for a spot where we might be able to get, let's say, a Spanish-speaking student, if they can read and write in Spanish functionally, also then to slide them into an IB Spanish 5 class or something, even though they might need some English skills. By the time we get to that level of our world languages, we're functioning wholly in whatever the target languages be. So that's one of the pieces that we've also looked at that goes with that. So all of that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, is set against the backdrop of virtual learning, and we can't move away from that. So if you happen to see any of the news headlines over the past, I'm going to say week and a half or 2 weeks, I think Fairfax County kind of reported out what the drop in their grading was from the first marking period. And then about a week later, MCPS came out. So we have that breakdown by school. So what I'm sharing with you here is actually how students at BCC performed at the end of the first marking period. So these are our final grades in the first marking period. And let me talk a little bit about what this chart shows, because it's a lot of numbers on here, and I didn't know a better way to present it than the way we have it here. So the EAM is our Equity Accountability Monitoring Group. So in Montgomery County Public Schools, we have 5 groups that we're monitoring: African American farm students, which are students who receive free and reduced meals; African American students who do not receive free and reduced meals; Hispanic farms; Hispanic non-farms; and then anyone else who receives free and reduced meals. So that would be our Asian, our white, or our multiracial students who receive farms are in that other farms category. And then our monitoring group is the group that historically performs the highest, which is our white and Asian non-farms students. So as you're looking at this chart, if you think about a typical student, if you're a parent, your child's enrolled in 7 classes. So if you choose the category that your child fits in, they're represented 7 times across that row. So for example, I will speak. So my daughter is a senior. She would fit in the monitoring group. If she earned 3 A's, she earned 3 A's. 63.5% of all grades that were earned by white students that are not farm students were A's. If you go on across there, 4.7 of all grades that were earned by white students who are non-farm were E's. So that's how the chart works out. The grand total down at the bottom shows the distribution across the whole school. So as we look at this, there are definitely patterns that jump out, and we've talked about this as both an administrative team and a leadership team. Definitely, as we look at, and I can't unfortunately highlight on this, but if we look at, as we look at our farms groups, so our students who are financially or in poverty, with 24% African American in E's, in the E category, 43% of our Hispanic students, 17.1% of our other farm students. And we compare that to our monitoring group, which is the group that we want to get everybody with or beyond, then that's a concern for us. So as we look just across, so that data's here, it's available. Again, it's a lot to digest. The other 2 things just to kind of show here, so you know the whole thing of what you're looking at. The I is incomplete and the NG is no grade, which would be the incomplete. I'm sorry. Sometimes my mouse decides it wants to go backwards. The incomplete would be a student who might be missing a single assignment near the end of the marking period, and the teacher gives them an incomplete to allow them to submit an assignment and work it up. The NG, most of the time, though, you see those are such small percentages, most of the time those are students who came into a class really late in the marking period, and rather than have them go back and make up everything and try to get that, the teacher assigns them an NG for a marking period. And then the good news is they didn't have to make up all that work. The bad news is that then their entire marking period, their entire semester grade becomes what they earn in the second marking period. So there are kind of 2 parts to that are there with it. So this is our grade distribution, which is not something, you know, that it raises a lot of questions for us internally as we look at it. And then we take into account the fact that over the past 2 weeks or past 3 weeks, MCPS has been asking parents to indicate whether or not they want to return to school. So when we look at this as an administrative team, as a school leadership team, as teachers, we know that we want to see people who are falling over here in these D's and E's columns saying, I want to come back to school. Because even though these numbers are not good, they're not good in a normal year, they're much, much higher this year. So what we ended up with, we just got this, so I haven't been able to dig into this a lot at all. But we just got back our numbers of students who, what they indicated on that parent preference survey. So 57.5% of the people who respond, of our student body, which is about 2,300, a little less than 2,300, said that they wanted to return to in-person instruction. 24% of the student body indicated virtual. And then from about 18.5%, there was no response, which means that they defaulted to a virtual experience. So when we look at that, that's then, 42.5% that are students that are virtual, which is a little above the capacity if we're looking at kind of what the straight metrics are that MCPS is working with right now. But the next part is more concerning. So when we look at this, and I couldn't put the 2 numbers side by side, but if we take, for example, what our student body looks like right now, what our African-American percentage of our student body, which is about 16%, 15 or 16%. So we're talking about 300 students roughly. About 100 of them didn't even respond. About 100 of them wanted to stay in virtual learning, and about 115 or 120 of them said that they wanted to come back. So if you look at this, our groups that are falling into our monitoring group, or into our most impacted group, we see among our African American students, among our Hispanic students, that we either got no response, or that but they're going to be virtual, I guess I should say, either because they didn't respond or they chose virtual at an overwhelming rate when we compare that to our white students and even our Asian students, but it's really pronounced in our white students, and that's a concern. The top 3 rows are even more concerning to me. Our ESOL students, 60% almost did not respond at all, and 28.3% are all that chose in person. And similar numbers for our farms. Our IEP students a little more kind of evenly dispersed their responses. So that is information. And again, I literally got this this morning and was able to pull this out to have this kind of representation of it. So I don't know that I have a lot more information about this data that I can share, but I definitely can take questions about it and try to come back to it. So that is the end of what I have. I can either stop sharing and turn it back over to Ms. Taylor, so we could take any questions that might be out there, or I can keep the share in case somebody wants to go back to one of the charts. Again, I know some of it is not, it's not as easy to see it quickly.
Dr. Mooney, if you can, we'd like to keep you to have the share. So could you go back to the percentage chart, which had the A through I?
This one?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So I had a question about, I understand the concept of the percentage, but when we say that, for example, African-American farm students are on the E, they're 24.2%, is that for one class, or is that their overall average?
That is, so 24.2% of all grades earned. So an African-American farms student might earn as many as 7 grades in a day. So they might have earned, so of the grades that were earned, so I don't know what the N is off the top of my head for African-American farm students, but in easy round numbers, let's say that the N is 100 students, that 100 students at BCC are African-American farm students. That means of all the grades that those, so that would be 700 grades that those students could earn. Does that make sense, Ms. Taylor? So of those 700 grades, 24% of the 700 grades that were earned in that group were E's, 7.5% were D's, 11.8% were C's, and so on. Does that make sense?
And did you get any, yes, sir, did you get any data about how that compares district-wide? Are we in line with what other schools are seeing, or how is it that how do we look overall?
So if you compared it to, I only have the straight data that the county provide, that the Board of Education looked at, and we're a little bit better off than MCPS, but we also have broken this down by department, actually. And in several departments, we saw some of the same anomalies that they were talking about the Board of Education meeting, where not only did we have more E's, a greater percentage of E's, we also had a greater percentage of A's, and the grades that were in the middle were where we had the fall off. So there were some pieces that we've looked at. So we're essentially in line with what the county looks like. I'm not a statistician, so I couldn't tell you, to what degree we are, but nothing was really out of line when we compared to what the county shared at the board, or what MCPS shared at the last board meeting.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you are doing in Waco? I know that you just got the information today, but what specific plans BCC has to look at our E's, particularly for the African American farms, the Hispanic farms, maybe other farms? What are we doing with pretty much the farms kids to ensure that we are not losing them? Okay,
so that actually then comes back to this data. So process-wise right now, and this is one of the things that I have to say every time I talk about what we're doing in preparation for the return to school, is always that the Board of Education is meeting next Tuesday and they say that they're having their final vote then. So right now, what I'm talking about tonight is what I know right now. It doesn't mean that that won't change after the board meeting on Tuesday, but for right now, what we got with this list of response by subgroups is actually, we are working, the first group that would come back to BCC are the students that we identify as students who are in the greatest danger of not being successful. Specifically, we're going to be looking at students who are seniors who might not be graduating. But then beyond that, for us, we are going to be looking at those students in those subgroups, and I'm going to go back up to this, in these subgroups who earned these Ds and Es. And when I look at the grade distribution for an individual student, unfortunately, most of the time, it's not a student who got an E or a D. It's 6 or 7 Es and Ds when they have earned that. So just looking at that. So part of what we're going to be doing as a system is, as we look at administratively who chose, we look at the individual names. If we identify students that we think should be back based on what their grades are, we're actually going to be extending personal invitations. And this is news to Dr. McGarrett. This is something I looked at this afternoon. I was doing that. So we're going to be identifying students that we believe, even if they chose virtual or they had a virtual no response because they didn't do, we're going to be trying to get them into the building whenever we do reopen, because that's where we can have the greatest impact. But that also provides us the greatest opportunity to provide them with support beyond what we do. One of the struggles that as a teacher, when I was a teacher, I was a special ed teacher, and one of the things that I always thought about was, how can I can work with the kids and control what they're doing when they're with me, and I tried to get them to do as much as I could while I had them with me. So we want those kids in the building with us so that we can help guide and monitor a little more easily than just through a Zoom class where they're actually in 100% control of whether they're engaged with us or not.
Yeah, so my next question, and I see Sherry has a question in the chat, but if
I
there's been a
was
lot of
about to
talk.
look at like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Apologies. Good job.
Yeah, Jerry is asking, how does this compare, this data, with previous years? I mean, we can say that it's worse, it's the same.
It does not compare favorably. I would hate to have these two put side by side and say that, have to answer questions about why this had happened. The data is not good from a year-over-year point of view.
Hi, this is Sherry. Sorry, so you're saying this year is an anomaly for other years, or is this a trend that you've seen over the years?
So in fairness, this is only my second time doing the first marking period at BCC, and we did switch student information management systems this year, which makes it a little harder for me to go back and get historic data. But I do have last year's data, and part of what I will judge this on is the fact that last year's data didn't raise any questions. I wasn't asked by my supervisors to create action plans about kind of how we were going to reverse a trend. So I'm going to, again, I don't have that. I can try to find it, what the historical is, but I know that the 2019 first marking period grades compared to the 2020 first marking period grades, that this set of data that's on the screen right now is much worse.
Okay.
In terms of student performance.
And Dr. Mooney, I had a question about, thank you, Sherry. I had a question about, it seems to be a large part of our solution would be relying on in-person education. But my understanding is from the metrics that have been identified for MCPS and that have been discussed by the county and others is that it's unlikely that we're going to go back to school because the numbers are so high for COVID. So my question is, what is our contingency plan if in fact we are not allowed to return for kids who are struggling?
So there are several layers that are getting built into there. So there have been some upgrades and some adjustments made to the grading and reporting policy to provide students with maximum flexibility, maximum grace. That's the only way to do it, but provide opportunities for students to give them the benefit of the doubt as much as possible, to kind of codify the idea that teachers and students would be engaged in reteaching and reassessment on a regular basis. Also, there have been some really serious efforts made to look at how we can modify curricular standards and curricular expectations to really make sure that we're hitting the things that are necessary. We are, one of the kind of downsides, one of the many downsides of this model of education is that we're seeing our students about 30 to 45 minutes less every week than we did. Plus, we've lost all of the kind of genuine and authentic opportunities for students and teachers to interact and have support, such as lunch, before school, and after school. So we're looking at ways that we can really make sure that the curricular time is meaningful and that we have that. That also will roll into the second semester curriculum for all subject areas, which means that, a student who's in the first semester of Algebra 2, for example, their Algebra 2B, which is their second semester teacher, will understand how the curriculum in the first semester was adjusted, but also what they need to do to go back in and build in skills or reinforce learning that students might not have had as many opportunities to practice as they would have in a normal setting. So there's some pieces there instructionally that we're looking at and how we do it, and we're working on that. Another big piece, and it is a much harder one, is that we are really trying to look at how we can make a concerted effort to build strong relationships with our students, and that is a challenge, admittedly, a challenge, but we are looking for opportunities and encouraging teachers to look for ways where they can build relationships with students, because there's a large body of research that shows that makes a difference in student performance, almost as much as the instruction, when the teachers and students have a good relationship. So we're looking at that too.
And I would add the parents to that, of course.
I
Exactly.
add the parents.
I was about to say that, how to engage the parents, because sometimes that is challenging as well. And well, you have a very robust group of volunteers to help with that. I think it's critical to sometimes to speak with families in the language that they speak at home. And I think that we can help as PDSA or in any capacity that we have.
May I ask another question? Is that someone else? Hi, yes, sorry, Dr. Mooney, I was just wondering, in terms of those stats, has there been any analysis on the level of attendance and participation? I'm just wondering, is it that these kids are not in the class and therefore they're getting these results, or is it that they're present but not engaged?
So it's actually another piece of data that we also received. So a significant portion of those students are students, unfortunately, who are in class, present, and still not performing well. And that's one of the pieces, that's one of the questions we've asked internally is how do we have a situation, where is the disconnect when we have a student who may be in class every day and still is earning a D or an E? And that's a conversation, to be very fair, that's a conversation we also had when we were in the building, because not to the same level, but we did have that phenomenon also where we would, a student would be there every day. We knew they were going to class. We knew that they were there with the teacher, and then they would still be not meeting the expectations or meeting standard in a course, and we would have those same types of questions.
I also wanted to add, hey, how you doing, Shell? I wanted to add Little Shelton, not Big Shelton.
My son wants to say hi. I'm sorry.
Hi.
What's my train of thought I was going to say? Oh, I was going to say this, is that it's a great question to ask about, how we're looking at data and what are we doing to help those individual students who, are receiving B's and E's. And when we look at the data, we actually are getting ready to do a kind of a refresher of our spreadsheet that we have. looking at first quarter data, how it compares to second quarter data, and combining that with looking at the attendance data. And so one of the things is that we looked at, obviously, an assessment of who does not have technology pieces, as we kind of start with there, like whether they need a MiFi device or whether it's a Chromebook. And as Dr. Mooney pointed out, we, as far as I'm concerned, if there's a student that needs something, they've reached out, we've directed them to either us or to Central Office to get that, and then they have those items. But we're still seeing individuals who still have those. They have the Chromebook, they have a new MiFi, a hotspot, but yet they're still not logging on. And there's also been, I guess you could say, there's also been an attempt from our part to be able to look at that as to students who are, as Dr. Mooney pointed out, they're attending classes, but they're not really engaged. And one of the things that's difficult about virtual learning, of course, during a global pandemic, I'm assuming this is happening everywhere, is that I'm not even trying to make a joke of it, but it was almost a joke that came about in a chat about the 2020 version of skipping is muting and then also cameras off. And they said the 1990s version of skipping, you have kids literally walking out the building, jumping the fence, going to the mall. So we have students who may be signing on, and so they are there. You see the name there, but they're not responsive. They're not responding to the teacher. Some of these students are home. Some of them are with their parents, but they're not really. Their parents are not looking at their screen, and of course, we're not asking your parent to do that. We know that's not possible, but it's difficult, at least for us on our part, because we're trying to reach those students. And it's what Dr. Mooney pointed out, the multiple opportunities that we've had, that we're giving students to be able to make up some of their late work, to also continually be reassessed and to be allowed to essentially make up some of those grades. And we also have an extension of time that we're given from the Board of Education to kind of have an analysis of that data from first quarter, and to ensure that students know essentially our grading practices of how we grade on a trend. So, for example, if a student did receive an E first marking period for let's just say it's an Algebra 1 class, for an example, the minimum grade, just mathematically speaking, the minimum grade that they would need to get credit would be a 59.5, which would be a D according to our grading scale. So when you get that first E, of course, we will do our grade analysis. We look at those kids who have D's and E's. We then kind of focus our attention on what they're going to need to be successful second quarter, in combination of the actual grade that they'll need, in combination with parental involvement, technology needs, and also ensuring that we look at utilization of our language line, which many staff members do use. We would like to get more staff members to use that, which of course is basically our interpretation line that we use to communicate with our families who do not have English as their primary language. So that includes, students who are speaking Spanish, Amharic, whether it be French or whatever language you can think of. We will have access to that to reach those parents in that way.
So I think this is a good turning point for us. Thank you so much, Dr. McGarrett and Dr. Mooney, for doing your presentation. Because we do have parents here, I think it's always important for parents to express any concerns they may have, because we have two VIPs in the house, and it's really important that we recognize that this is a dialogue. And so in order for Dr. Mooney and Dr. McGarrett to do their job well, they need to hear from people like us. And so I'd like to open up the floor to people who may have concerns about any experiences they have had, and chat about that, and or have heard about. So you don't have to talk about yourself, but you can obviously talk about anything that you know about. So I will now stop talking, and hopefully someone else will start. Corinne, can you mute your mic? Can you mute your mic for me, please? Okay. All right, I'll go ahead and start. Hi, Dr. Mooney. I'm Lisa Taylor, and I had a challenge with a teacher who was not very kind to my son, and so I'll say what my son had handed in homework, and he didn't the teacher didn't acknowledge it. And so he says, well, I didn't get the homework, but my son handed it in. And so I always, because he's a junior, I want the junior to advocate for himself, but it wasn't working very well. So he sent the assignment again and didn't get any feedback. And so finally I interceded. And I found the teacher was very combatant. And I had a concern about when parents try to address issues in the online learning world. I think that one of the feedback I have for the teacher is that we be more receptive. And his position was, I didn't get the email, so he's going to get an F. And I said, but we sent the emails. We'll take a picture. Well, we took a picture. Well, can you send it again and again? And so I guess my concern is that when we have these hurdles, and I know what the answer is, but I'd like for you to talk a little bit about when we have specific issues of teachers and as it relates to online learning, what course of action should we take?
So there could be multiple courses of action. So the goal is always to, as with any conflict, to resolve it at the lowest level possible, which, you reach out to the teacher, that's a concern. There could be a next layer is always an opportunity to reach out to the resource teacher for that department, and all of those are listed on the BCC website. The reason I recommend the resource teacher most of the time with issues that are inside classes is that if there are curriculum concerns or concerns about what might be needed to demonstrate mastery, that's where we're going to go back to anyway, because that's the content area expert for that. If that is not able to be resolved in a way that is satisfactory, then the next level would be to the grade level administrator, which so for an 11th grader would be Ms. Sutton, for a 12th grader, Mr. Levine, for a 10th grader, Dr. Mugerwa, and for a 9th grader, Ms. Adamson, and then Mr. Nelson actually works with our IB students and focuses on supervising all of our IB programs. So any of those. So that would be generally the chain that would work for that, with that kind of being through there. The goal is however, especially in virtual learning, but my own personal philosophy anyway, is to provide students with opportunities and compassion and grace to give them the same thing that we would want as adults. It may or may not surprise any of you who are on this call to know that, and Dr. McGarrett will, I think, smile when I say this, that the same teachers that we get the most complaints about not kind of wanting to give people grace or extend that extra 10 minutes on an assignment are the same ones that want that same type of thing from us every time we turn around, that they don't give us what we need or what's required of them. And that, so we do look for those opportunities. That's my philosophy. Like, there are things for which there are deadlines, and then there are opportunities for growth. And when there are patterns, we start talking about how to get out of those patterns. But a single instance is not a time to drop the hammer. My opinion there, my personal thought and view on that.
Who else wants to tell a story? You guys are a quiet group. Okay, I don't hear anything. So what I think would be a good use of our time, because we have about 15 minutes, is to go through our letter, if that's okay with you, Dr. Mooney. So did I hear a yes or no? I didn't hear anything. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, let me see where it is. I have many things going on in my life. EPC letter to the administration. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to scroll up to the top so you can see the beginning. So this is, as you all may know, is our letter that we sent to the Diversity Parent Council, sent to Dr. Moody on June the 12th of 2020. And in it, essentially, we were talking about, as we began the earlier part of our session, is how we can deal with racial animus and discrimination in our community. And we alluded to we talked about we are two BCC. So we want to reiterate to Dr. Mooney and to Dr. McGarrett, we understand that this precedes both of your presence, but nonetheless is a really important part, I think, of our community, and we have an interest in ensuring that that we address it. And so I put the letter out only because it's my guide to help. The letter has actually been disseminated to DPC, so everyone on this chat should have received a copy of the letter. If you have not, please let me know, and I'm happy either myself, Paula, or Coach can send you a copy of the letter. And I guess the other point is that we are receiving, Dr. Mooney, other information about SROs, and so wanted to let you know the NAACP made a request from the MCPD, Montgomery County Police Department, to talk about SROs. And so I think a larger picture about this discussion is how we deal with our concerns post online life, so that we want to know that when we come back to school, that our kids are going to be welcomed and that they will be able to thrive in a fair and just educational realm. And so I guess one of the questions I would have is there have been a lot of concerns about both security officers and your school resource officer, and how they may be disproportionately addressing or disciplining students of color. And so one of our questions would be, what, if anything, have you done or have you thought about doing as it relates to the physical plan, and when students return, about how students of color will be engaging with law enforcement and with your security?
So the first part of that is really that educational piece. So I guess let me back up one piece. So we, going back to our desire to increase diversity, we did, one of our security staff members, a white male, left, and we were able to hire an African-American male as his replacement. And that is one of the pieces that we were hopeful to be able to find. But what is even more important about Mr. Snowden is actually he has a background in juvenile justice and has been trained in implementing restorative justice, which is something that we hope to bring not only to the security team and the administrative team, but also to the whole staff. Again, as we have the ability to, it's a tough thing to roll out virtually, but our goal is to make sure that we have those educational components. And that's part of what, when I go back to what I was saying earlier, when we look at the professional development and what we're asking people to engage in, that includes our security staff. It's not limited to what's happening in the classroom, because we know that for 2.5 hours a day, almost, when we count the amount of time students are there before school and after school and at lunch, and between classes, students are not in class, that they are engaging in opportunities, and there are opportunities for them to be seen. So we're looking at those educational components that we can do. We also are actually going to be monitoring kind of what that looks like and how we're seeing referrals come in, how we're seeing those conversations. One of the kind of hard parts of that is we don't always see if it's an informal conversation that a security staff member has. If it doesn't come to the office or doesn't result, I apologize. But if it doesn't result in a referral, then it's a tougher thing for us to really track and monitor. But that's one of those pieces that we're going to continue to look at, and how we do that. The other piece, and you may or may not know this, our security team leader joined us in mid-November, and she was actually just in the process of kind of trying to build kind of a different culture within that 5-member team. One of the things she was doing was actually rotating their assignments so that people weren't staying in one area all the time, so they were having opportunities to be in different parts of the building. Again, with the goal of not only familiarizing and having security staff be around a variety of students, but also to avoid that, hey, I see you in this bathroom every time, third period, what are we doing? Why are you always here? Those kind of conversations, which students legitimately feel like they're being targeted when security staff are saying that to them. So we're looking at, that's one of the pieces we specifically put in place, was really saying, okay, Mr. Cunningham, you're at the East-West Highway entrance for the month of January, but for the month of February, you're going to be on the 3rd and 4th floor. And then just how that rotation looks. So that's some of the things that we put in place already, but that education and training component and really monitoring them. Miss Adamson, who is our new assistant principal, is actually supervising the security team this year. That's one of her roles. And as we've talked about what we want them to do, both as we brought her on and as we brought Mr. Snowden on, is really to have that restorative justice framework implemented across our security team. So that's an ongoing role.
And then one of our recommendations was that you look at the discipline data. So again, this is all to be happening in the future, but one of the things we learn in assessing performance of any school is looking at the data. So to the extent that you are making these changes, which sound to be that they're going to be helpful, one of the requests that we have is to ensure that you're actually looking at how many kids you're suspending, how many kids are being stopped by these police officer security, so that we can see if there's any trends. And there could not be any, but I think it's important for the school to look at the data to make sure that there's no disproportionate effect on any one type of student. So the other thing is there's been concerns echoed time and time again about lack of teacher responsiveness. And so I think what we've heard from you today is that if we do have concerns, we are to seek out the resource teachers, which is the lead, like the department head. And if that doesn't work, we talk to the assistant principal. But I've also heard you say that if we have any concerns, we can always come to you if we feel like none of those options are being very effective.
Absolutely. I'm always available for any of that. So you can always reach out to me for sure.
Okay, and then there was the other issue that's continuing to be an issue about students who are getting E's and parents are not knowing until the end of the interim. And so I guess one of the questions that we have is about what, if anything, is BCC doing to engage with parents and or students who might be not thriving from the day one to the day end of the interim?
So that is a much tougher question for us. So MCP, so we do have through Synergy and through Parent View the opportunity at any point to provide those interim reports, and they actually come out. They're available electronically the 15th, which I believe is next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Tuesday. So that's the interim. That's the halfway point of the second marking period. As hard as it is to believe that we are at that point already. But those are available there. But what we ask teachers to do is when we see students, especially going back to the conversation from earlier, when we see those students who are there every day but still not being successful, we ask them to initiate that conversation. We know that sometimes doesn't happen, but that's our ask. But those interim reports are required for all students, so parents can access via Parent View at any point. They can always reach out to the counseling office if they're having trouble kind of seeing what's going on with parents. And we're asking our counselors also at this time to do the same type of thing. So for example, in MCPS, we are required to send out letters at the end of the semester for seniors who are in danger of not graduating because of classes. We actually just had counselors send out letters to seniors at the end of the first marking period this time. We asked them to identify that. So we're asking our counselors to engage in some of that work too as we're doing that. But so two parts to that. So if parents are seeing it, definitely we want to have that side of the conversation and engage in it. But if the teachers are seeing it, we're asking them to do that same thing, to engage in that conversation. But we're actively involving both our counselors, and then every 2 weeks, our counseling team, it's called a Collaborative Student Services Team Meeting, CSST. It's a tough acronym. Every 2 weeks, we have a meeting that includes all of our counseling services, our school psychologist, all of the assistant principals, our pupil personnel worker, our special education resource teacher. Am I missing anyone from that list, Dr. McGarwa? It's a huge, it's the main office conference room full of people, virtually now, but in normal setting, it's a conference room full. They actually meet every 2 weeks, and they identify students based on data that they're concerned about, that they are going to reach out to and do that. So it's a holistic approach for how we're going to engage students and parents. So
yeah, I think you named everybody. But yeah, it's definitely a team effort.
It's almost 20 people when that group is together.
Yeah, it's a large group, so they are productive meetings, and we definitely take the time needed to analyze the data and to make those changes that we feel like need to happen within students in our interaction with them and how we can improve on their learning.
Okay, so I guess one of my feedback then I've heard from parents again is that Parent View, and I think Lyric and I've talked about this before, is it does not present the grades. And so I think parents are often blindsided until the end of the quarter. For example, if I looked at my parent view today, some of the grades for my son's classes are NA. And but that can't be because they've had assignments that are due. And so I think because when they took away the Canvas part, like I used to be able to sneak in the back door and look at Canvas, but now I can't do that. And so this is just an FYI, like if parents are not being notified because the grades are not being uploaded into Parent View, the concern is, and this has been the concern of the past, but more exacerbated now, is that parents may not be made aware of their students' performance until they receive the interim. And by that point, we're looking at several assignments that either can or cannot be made up, but it's almost like an avalanche of work that now has to be addressed. And so this is the feedback that I would hope that you share with MCS, is about how parents can have better transparency for grading, because without the Canvas, which is what we used last year, and then they took that away mid-semester, it's really hard for parents to know. And if they don't know and the teachers are not notifying them until the end, it's a recipe for failure.
Thank you for that. I would actually love at some point, maybe if we can, in a different, you and I, and you could screen share and show me what you're seeing. I will say one of the greatest downfalls from my perspective of this is that when parents talk to me about what they're seeing in Parent View, I have a totally different view. So I would love it sometime if we can connect and just so I can see what you're seeing, because that allows me then to maybe help with that with teachers, and go from there. So, but I definitely,
right, absolutely. And I think, right, going back to the E, I'm sorry to cut you off, Dr. Mooney, but if we have the E's, maybe part of the problem is that parents don't know early enough. And again, if we have any other language or economic or other barriers, it almost becomes an insurmountable task to address the E. If the E is there 35 days into the session, if I were a parent and I didn't have, whatever I didn't have, it would be almost like, well, what's the point? Because no one ever told me. I felt like I was disinherited from the educational process, which is a sad state of affairs. I'm going to stop talking because Lyric has something in the chat, and I'm not allowed to talk about the chat because that's Paula, but is Paula here? Paula left. So, and Lyric says, many 504 IEP parents have to proactively email every teacher about their grades because of the deficiencies of Parent View. Is there any way to put in a tripwire after 2 E's and after the teacher or counselor reaches out? I like that. That's a good idea. And again, I know this isn't a question for you, Dr. Mooney, but it's a macro question of like, how can parents continue to be engaged in the process when they see failing students? And we don't know the answer. These are just our ideas.
And I'm recording that question. I don't know the answer, how to get there, but I can raise it.
Thank you so much. So I have my time now at 7:45. The letter was halfway done. Dr. Mooney, you get off easy. But we really, I wanted to give people a chance to, if they had any parting thoughts before we close our meeting, and also thank Dr. Mooney, Dr. McGarrett for joining us. So do we have any other comments that people want to make before we conclude?
This is Nancy. I just have one question. It's okay, Lisa?
Okay.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I get a lot of statements from parents who are just very unhappy about the lack of response when they do write emails to teachers, administrators, etc. And my ask is that if a teacher or an administrator knows that they're just behind on their emails, if they could have a stock that says, I am at 96 hours getting back to you. If I don't get back to you in 96 hours, send me an email with this in the subject line and I will respond. I think we all know that it's crazy, but we just want something that says, I have seen that you have an issue and I'm getting back to you. I'm not as fast as I'd like. And I think parents would be happy with that. But right now there's radio silence and we don't know what to do.
And that brings up a good point, Nancy, because under the policy from an MCPS, there is a requirement that teachers respond within 48 hours, and that's not happening. And again, we understand that there are issues, but we need, again, and the other thing is that we are seeing these parents who, for many of us, it's easy to send an email, but if you're working 9 to 5, 9 to 9, you send an email to a parent and you don't hear back, email to the teacher and you don't hear back, then it can be challenging and discouraging for parents who are trying to make every effort to be part of the process. So thank you, Nancy, for that. So, all right, so it's 7:47. We'd like to thank everyone for joining our call today, especially Dr. Mooney, who is always available for us, and we really appreciate that, and has been very responsive to our concerns. Under his leadership, I think we're excited about the changes that are to come, and with Dr. Magera, who keeps us out of trouble. So thank you everyone for joining. This is recorded, and we will be sharing that later. And we look forward to having a continuing conversation about equity in education. Everyone have a good evening. Oh, yes, Dr. Mooney, go.
I just wanted to make sure I put the PDF of the link to the PDF of my presentation in the chat a little earlier, and Ms. Taylor, I can send that to you so you can send it out with the recording.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Everyone have a good evening. Be safe. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.